Welcome to Attainable Green. I'm Jess, and today we're going to do a care video on the Zygonisia Murasaki Komachi. Now, this is a collaboration video with Nina of Ninja Orchids and Yoshi of Plants and Other Things. We're all going to talk about how to take care of this particular plant in our environments and the things that we learned along the way to make you guys better at growing these plants and see if our environments match yours or how we can grow these in a different setup and still have great success. So let's get started. I've had the Zygonisia for a little over a year, and when I got it, it was already starting its new growths for the year, but it didn't flower. So this year I think it's adapted to my environment, so the two new growths started out, and I have one spike each with 3 flowers on each spike. It has a lovely fragrance. It's a little bit sweeter and less peppery than the average Zygopetalum bloom, and I think that's what makes it a lot more pleasant to experience. The scent is actually quite strong when the temperature is warm and there's some sunlight on it, and in the shade it tends to have slightly less fragrance. The flowers on this plant tend to be a little bit more cupped than the Zygopetalum, but I don't find that to be a distraction. I actually like that it kind of has that kind of cupped look. So diving into the culture, I'm going to start with the basic environment that I have this plant in, and then we'll kind of break it down to the individual components that make up the culture. So first off, this plant, I have it outdoors in my side yard, and I live in Southern California, zone 10B, and basically we get pretty hot summers and pretty dry but mild winters. So the lowest temperatures we get are about kind of the low 40s, and the highest temperatures we get are about 100 degrees Fahrenheit or so in the summertime. So in the summertime, I have a 50% shade cloth over this plant, and it gets about 6 to 8 hours of sunlight and maybe more depending on where the angle of the sun is located. In the wintertime, I completely remove the shade cloth and it's in bright shade. There's no direct sunlight on this plant because the way my side yard is set up, that it's between 2 tall 3-story buildings. So it doesn't get a lot of light in the winter season. So when it comes to water, I just use tap water from the hose. So here in Southern California, our tap water is fairly hard because it comes from the Colorado River and it's kind of pumped into Southern California. So our water parameters are about a pH between 6 and 7 and a TDS between 200 to 300. I tested my water earlier this year and it seemed like a lot of the water parameters were still sufficient for growing orchids, so I haven't had any trouble using tap water on my orchids. During the summer season, I can water this plant almost every day, every other day in sphagnum moss, and it's no problem. And in the wintertime, I back it off to about once a week or even once every 2 weeks, depending on, I guess, the ambient temperature and humidity. As for media, it is currently potted in sphagnum moss, and I have not changed it since I got this plant, and it's probably due for a repot. So after the flowers fade, I will probably repot this plant in a mix of small bark and perlite. I find that the Zygopetalums aren't too picky about their media. It really just depends on how you water and if your media is sufficient to hold enough water or to drain enough just so that it can keep the roots happy. So I have with this one in sphagnum moss, I had another one in pure bark, and I have one in small bark mix, and also another one in coconut husk chips. So in all of those situations, they have all grown well, and I haven't had any problems with those plants. So when it comes to repotting these plants, I try to keep it as big as possible. So I haven't really had the need to divide a plant, except in the beginning when I was starting. I really wanted to divide plants. I thought it was just like a fun thing to do to get more plants. And when I did that, half of the plant died, and then the other half I still have, but they're kind of struggling. So since then, I kind of am wary about dividing my plants. But when it comes to repotting, I just try to do the least amount of disturbance as possible. So if all the roots look healthy, I just kind of shake away the majority of the media and then just replace it and put it in a larger pot. If some of the roots are dead, then I trim it back and then size up the pot and see what it needs. I try to keep the plants pretty snug in a smaller pot because the larger the pot, the more water it retains. And in my case, I do need a lot of water retention, but I find that if I overwater those plants, the roots will rot and the plants just don't do well. So I'd rather have a smaller pot and just keep upsizing every year or every 2 years instead of getting a large pot and then the roots just don't do as well. Usually the timing of repotting kind of depends, I guess. I like to repot when I see new roots on the new growths. So usually after it blooms, the immature growth will send out some roots, and that is the best time I found for me to repot this plant in its new setup. That way the new roots can adjust to the new media, and then it can support itself from there. Most of the time the old roots still hang around, and if the media is not too much different than its current media, then I'd find that all of the roots still survive. If it's too big of a jump, then I feel like it'll dump more of the older roots as the new roots establish. As for some problems that I've had with these plants, overall my zygos don't really get a lot of pests. They don't really have a lot of issues. The main things that I have found on my plants is that it gets this leaf spotting. So even on this Zygonisia, some of the older growths have leaf spotting on the underside of the leaves, and that is due to a fungal infection. Now this doesn't kill off the plant in particular, but it kind of creates this unsightly leaf effect. I've noticed that the newer growths that I have this year are coming out completely clean, and even last year's growths are fairly clean as well. So I kind of contribute leaf spotting to either an airflow issue due to cold temperatures, or also too much water on the leaves when it's cold, and maybe that's some cold damage. But in a way, the old growths with the spots, they're kind of like freckles or age spots on humans, right? Like they're a little unsightly, but you know, they get them as they age. And as the plant matures and there's more new growths, I'm sure like the old leaves will die and it'll just be leafless bulbs. So then it's not going to be that big of an issue. One of the other things that I have encountered with some of my Zygopetalums is sometimes the new growths do rot. So I don't know exactly why it does that, but sometimes it's just not viable, or it grew at the wrong time or season, so it can't sustain itself. And so even though one of the new growths may rot, it kind of sends out another one a couple months or a couple weeks later. So it doesn't seem to set the plant back. As the plant ages, some of the back bulbs may start to shrivel or change color, and then it's fine to remove them. I haven't had any major issues with the plants in that way. I think the biggest problem I had with growing Zygopetalums is basically overwatering these plants and drowning them in water at the wrong time of year. So when the plant is actively growing and it's putting out new leaves, new growths, new roots, that's the time to water your plants well. So that's like the spring and the summertime, even fall. You can kind of get away with watering your plants almost regularly, like every day or every other day, as long as it's well draining. And then in the wintertime, when the weather gets cool and the temperatures dip below 60 degrees Fahrenheit, that's when you want to back off the watering and let these plants kind of dry out a little bit longer between the watering sessions. During the wintertime here, it can get down to 40 or so degrees. And during that time, I don't water the plants. Basically, it can go almost a whole month without water. You will see some of the bulbs start shriveling a little bit, and that's okay. So at that time, I probably water once a week, once every other week even, and just to check to see that the plant is doing well. Once the temperatures increase, then it's fine. I just don't like leaving the plant sitting in wet water overnight, because I think that it causes the roots to kind of not do well. Another thing is when repotting, you just don't want to disturb the roots too much and break too many roots. I think in the beginning, I was really aggressive with my repots, and I just wanted to clean out every single little thing out of the roots, and I broke a ton of the roots, and when I put it in its new pot, everything died. Like all of the roots that got broken and messed up, they just didn't want to grow or branch out, and so the plant was set back in that way. So by being a little gentler with the repot and not always cleaning out every single piece of the media, it can help the plant do well so that it doesn't get set back. I find that growing Zygopetalums outside year-round has just been the easiest way for me to take care of them. And once they're in bloom, I can bring them inside and make sure that they don't come with pests or anything, and then just enjoy the blooms. And then after that, and after the blooms fade, I can return it back outside and it's not a problem. So that is how I take care of the Murasaki Komachi, and I am kind of interested to see how Nina and Yoshi will be growing their plants and what they do in their care. Thank you for watching, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel Attainable Green to follow along on my orchid growing journey. If you want to see more videos about Zygopetalums, please click on the playlist, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye!